I never imagined the place I bought for its profound silence would become the epicenter of the loudest, most gratifying conflict of my life. I purchased my cabin on a wooded acre of land as an escape hatch from civilization, a fortress of solitude where the only rules were dictated by the seasons and common sense. It was an older property, a relic from a time before the nearby sprawling development, Crestview Estates, had even been a glimmer in a developer's eye. What I wanted was peace. What I got was a war with a woman who believed her authority was as vast and unchallengeable as the mountain sky itself. And it all started, as these things so often do, over a parking spot. My parking spot, on my land, right next to my cabin. It was a crisp Saturday morning, the first time I'd brought my work truck up for a long weekend of projects. I'm a cartographer and land surveyor by trade, a job that requires meticulous attention to detail, a deep understanding of legal boundaries, and a truck equipped with about 1,000 pounds of specialized gear. As the engine cooled with a gentle tick-tick-tick, a golf cart came zipping up my gravel driveway, kicking up dust like a miniature chariot of fury. At the helm was a woman I would come to know as Brenda, president of the Crestview Estates Homeowners Association. She didn't get out. She just pointed a finger, a diamond ring flashing in the sun, right at my truck. "You can't park that here," she shrieked, her voice sharp enough to peel bark off the surrounding pines. "That is a commercial vehicle. It is a clear violation of Section 7, Paragraph C of the HOA covenants. Move it immediately." I leaned against the fender of my truck, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Morning," I said calmly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is my property. It's not part of the HOA." Brenda let out a sound somewhere between a scoff and a laugh. "Oh, honey, everything you can see from this road is part of Crestview Estates. I am the president of the board, and I am telling you, we have rules about unsightly commercial vehicles. You have 24 hours to move it, or it will be towed, and you will be fined $100 per day." What Brenda, in her sun visor and wraparound sunglasses glory, failed to comprehend was that she wasn't just accosting a new cabin owner. She was lecturing a man whose entire professional life revolved around defining, with millimeter accuracy, exactly where one person's authority ends and another's begins. She had just screamed at a mapmaker about the location of a line she couldn't see, but which I knew was as real and solid as the granite bedrock beneath our feet. She thought she was laying down the law, but all she was really doing was handing me the coordinates to her eventual downfall. Have you ever encountered someone who is so confidently, so breathtakingly wrong about something? It's a strange sight to behold, but I promise you, the story of how that confidence was systematically and publicly dismantled is one you're going to want to hear. My first instinct was to de-escalate with simple, verifiable facts. I found that most disputes can be resolved if you just calmly present the data. So, I walked over to her golf cart, holding up my phone. "Brenda, I appreciate you looking out for the neighborhood's aesthetic," I began, adopting the most reasonable tone I could muster. "But I really do think you're mistaken. Here, this is the county's public GIS portal." I showed her the screen, where my parcel of land was clearly outlined with a thick, unambiguous line, separate from the sea of pink-shaded parcels that constituted Crestview Estates. My property, Lot 7A, was subdivided in 1978. The Crestview development wasn't platted until the late 90s. My land was never incorporated into your association. She barely glanced at the screen, waving a dismissive hand as if shooing away a fly. "That's just some map on the internet." "That's not how it works," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "When you live on this mountain, you abide by the mountain's rules. And I make the rules." I tried again, pulling up a PDF of my property deed. "This is the legal deed recorded with the county clerk. It makes no mention of the Crestview HOA, its covenants, or any related encumbrances. Legally, I'm not bound by them." She actually laughed this time. "Paperwork," she scoffed. "Lawyers can make paper say anything. I'm telling you what the reality is. You move the truck, or you'll be hearing from us." And with that, she spun her golf cart around and sped off, leaving me in a cloud of dust and self-righteousness. I honestly thought that might be the end of it, a cranky neighbor making empty threats. I was wrong. 2 days later, an official-looking envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a letter, printed on Crestview Estates HOA letterhead, formally notifying me of a $100 fine for improperly parked commercial vehicle. Below the typed portion, a furious scrawl in red ink read, "This is your only warning! Pay up!" This was the moment the situation shifted. This wasn't just a verbal tiff anymore. She had put her baseless claim in writing. She had created a paper trail, and in my line of work, a paper trail is everything. It's a map that leads from a claim to the truth. Her letter wasn't a threat. It was a formal invitation to a battle she had no idea she was supremely unequipped to fight. That evening, another discovery. A small, laminated card was tucked into my front door. It was another violation notice, this time for unapproved lawn ornamentation, citing a small, whimsical wooden owl my niece had carved for me that sat on a stump. The fine was $50. Brenda wasn't just an enforcer. She was a predator, constantly circling, looking for any perceived infraction to feed her hunger for control. The frustration that had been simmering inside me began to cool and harden into something else entirely. Pure, crystalline determination. This woman wasn't going to listen to reason. She didn't care about facts or legal documents. She only cared about power. Fine, I thought. I would use my own unique set of tools to address the situation. She wanted to talk about rules and boundaries? Excellent. We would have the most thorough, well-documented conversation about rules and boundaries she had ever had in her life. The weekend warrior in me retreated, and the professional surveyor took over. The moment I got back to my office in the city on Monday, I wasn't just Alex, the guy with the cabin. I was A.J. Miller of Miller Surveying and Geomatics. My initial frustration had transformed into a cold, methodical focus. Brenda had rejected my simple evidence, so I decided I would build a case so robust, so layered with verifiable proof, that it would be like arguing against gravity. My first stop wasn't a lawyer's office. It was the County Hall of Records, a place I knew as well as my own living room. For a surveyor, this place is a sanctuary, a library of truth written in ink and embossed seals. I wasn't just there to reconfirm what I already knew about my own property. My goal now was much, much bigger. I wanted to understand the entire legal anatomy of the Crestview Estates HOA. I wanted a complete blueprint of Brenda's kingdom. I started by pulling the master plat for the entire subdivision, a massive linen sheet filled with the intricate lines and notations of the original surveyors. As expected, my little 1-acre plot was clearly depicted as Parcel 7A, excluded. Check. Next, I pulled the HOA's Articles of Incorporation, the document that gave it legal life. Then came the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC. The very Bible from which Brenda preached her sermons of conformity. I spent hours poring over the dense legalese, cross-referencing parcel numbers and legal descriptions. It was tedious work for most, but for me, it was like reading a familiar story. And then, I found it. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a seismic fault line running directly beneath Brenda's throne. It was in the legal description of the common areas. The HOA's bylaws proudly proclaimed their ownership and authority over all common areas, which they defined as the main access road leading into the subdivision, Mountain View Lane, and a 2-acre parcel near the entrance designated as Crestview Park. This was where they had the community, mailboxes, a small gazebo, and a playground. This was ground zero for many of Brenda's tyrannical rules about parking, loitering, and holiday decorations. The problem was, when I cross-referenced the parcel number for Crestview Park and the legal description for Mountain View Lane with the actual county property transfer records, I hit a wall. Or rather, I hit a void. The title for those specific pieces of land had never been legally transferred from the original, now-defunct developer, Mountaintop Holdings, LLC, to the Crestview Estates, HOA. Legally speaking, the HOA didn't own the road. They didn't own the park. They were squatters. For more than 15 years, they had been maintaining, insuring, and most importantly, enforcing rules on property they had absolutely no legal authority over. Every fine Brenda had ever levied for a guest parking on the side of the road, Every citation for a non-approved picnic in the park was all built on a foundation of sand. This was the aha moment. My personal problem with Brenda was a symptom of a much larger disease, an organization operating on assumption and arrogance rather than legal fact. My fight was no longer just about my truck or my wooden owl. It was now about dismantling an entire edifice of illegitimate power. The glee I felt was not malicious. It was the profound satisfaction of a puzzle solver who has just found the key piece that makes the entire picture snap into focus. Brenda thought she was a queen ruling her mountain. I had just discovered her castle was made of cardboard. The discovery in the county records office changed the entire scope of my mission. It was no longer a defensive action. It was time to plan a counteroffensive. A quiet, methodical, and utterly devastating one. My strategy crystallized into a three-pronged attack. First, I would secure my own fortress. I would obtain certified copies of every relevant document proving, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that my property was exempt. This was the easy part, my personal shield. Second, I would expose the fundamental flaw in the HOA's authority over its so-called common areas. This was the sword, aimed not just at Brenda, but at the very foundation of her power over the entire community. Third, and most crucially, I needed to choose the perfect battlefield. A private confrontation would be pointless. She would just deny, deflect, and double down. No, this had to be public. It needed to be a moment of undeniable, irrefutable revelation in front of the very people from whom she derived her power. The upcoming annual HOA homeowners meeting was the obvious stage. I just needed to make sure I was on the program. To do that, I had to bait the bear. Brenda's arrogance was her greatest weakness, and I decided to exploit it. That next weekend, I returned to the cabin and engaged in some light, strategic provocation. I didn't just park my work truck in its usual spot. I parked it at a slight angle, making it just a little more conspicuous. I bought a small, tasteful, but decidedly non-compliant solar-powered fountain and placed it near the wooden owl. It was just enough to be a clear, undeniable violation of the aesthetic codes she held so dear. The reaction was as swift and predictable as the sunrise. Within days, 2 more violation notices arrived. The fines were now cumulative, totaling over 350. But this time, the letter included something new and wonderful. It was a formal threat. Failure to pay these fines and bring your property into compliance within 30 days will result in the HOA's legal counsel placing a lien on your property. Perfect. A lien was a legal action, a significant escalation that she couldn't easily walk back. Better still, the latest HOA email newsletter, forwarded to me by a neighbor I was slowly befriending, contained the pièce de résistance. In her President's Corner, Brenda wrote, "Please be sure to attend this year's annual meeting, as we will be holding a final vote on critical enforcement action against a non-compliant homeowner on Mountain Spur Road. It is vital that we stand together to protect our community values and property values." She was making me the star of her show. She was building a public platform and inviting me to stand on it, intending to make an example of me. The irony was so thick I could taste it. She was meticulously constructing the very gallows from which her own authority would hang. All I had to do was let her keep building, while I calmly and quietly prepared the evidence that would spring the trap. Her overconfidence was my greatest ally, a silent partner in my plan for her complete and total humiliation. A general fighting a campaign knows the value of reconnaissance and allies. I was fighting a legal and social battle, but the principle was the same. While Brenda was busy drafting her condemnations, I was quietly mapping the human terrain of Crestview Estates. I needed to know if I was a lone dissident or if there was a silent, resentful populace living under her thumb. My method was simple neighborliness. I baked a batch of cookies, a surprisingly effective tool of espionage, went for a walk. I introduced myself to a few homeowners, making small talk about the weather and the beautiful scenery. It didn't take long to find George. He was an older gentleman, a retired engineer, meticulously tending to his rose bushes. When I mentioned I was the new owner of the old cabin, his eyes lit up with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "Ah, so you're the one," he said, his voice a low rumble. Heard Brenda's already been giving you the welcome wagon treatment, I chuckled. You could say that. She seems very passionate about the rules, George snorted, snipping a dead blossom from a bush with surgical precision. Passionate? That's one word for it. Last year she tried to fine me because my mailbox was, and I quote, an unapproved shade of forest green. It's been the same color for 20 years. He went on to complain about the ever-increasing HOA fees, the arbitrary enforcement, and Brenda's general dictatorial style. He was the ally I was looking for, a respected longtime resident who was fed up but felt powerless. I didn't reveal my entire hand to him, but I hinted that I was looking into the legality of some of the HOA's claims. I'm a surveyor, I told him. I like to make sure all the lines are straight. If you come to the annual meeting, I think you might find it more interesting than usual. I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. He promised he'd be there. With an ally in place, I turned to the final phase of my preparation, forging my weapons. I didn't need lawyers or private investigators. I had a plotter, a laminator, and a deep well of professional expertise. I spent an entire evening in my office creating the presentation that would be Brenda's undoing. It wasn't just a stack of documents. It was a masterclass in visual persuasion. Weapon number 1 was a huge 36 by 48-inch map, printed in high-resolution color and laminated for dramatic effect. It was the official, certified county plat map of the entire area. I used a thick red marker to trace the boundary of my own property, and in bold letters at the bottom, I added the key annotation. Parcel 7, A, excluded from Cresty View Estates subdivision, per Plat Book 14, page 82. Weapon number 2 was even more damning. It was another giant laminated map, this time an overlay. I took the HOA's own internal map, the one they used to define their jurisdiction, and made it semi-transparent. I then superimposed it over the official county plat map. The result was stark and undeniable. The areas the HOA claimed as their common property, Mountain View Lane and Crestview Park, were shown in a bright, angry red, clearly outside the legal boundaries of the land they actually owned. It was a visual representation of their overreach, a map of their delusion. Alongside the maps, I compiled a binder. Each page was a plastic sheath document, certified copies of the deeds, the county transfer records, the developer's articles of dissolution, and the HOA's own bylaws, with the relevant, contradictory sections highlighted in fluorescent yellow. I three-hole punched everything. I made copies. It was a dossier of pure, unassailable fact. It was an arsenal of truth, and I was about to walk it directly into the heart of the enemy's camp. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that would set the stage perfectly for the annual meeting, fell into place a week before the event. Brenda, unable to contain her righteous fury, decided to escalate beyond letters and newsletters. She decided to bring in the law. I was up at the cabin, enjoying a quiet cup of tea on my porch, when I saw the familiar black and white of a sheriff's cruiser making its way slowly up my driveway. Behind it, like a pilot fish on a shark, was Brenda in her golf cart, her arms crossed, wearing a smirk of ultimate triumph. This was it. The moment she believed she would finally see me put in my place by a real authority figure. A deputy, a man with a calm, professional demeanor, and a name tag that read, Sutton, stepped out of his car. "Afternoon, sir," he said, his eyes flicking from me to my truck, then to Brenda, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. "We received a call about a commercial vehicle parked in violation of a local ordinance and a potential trespassing issue." "That would be me," Brenda chirped from her cart. "He refuses to comply with the community rules, Sheriff. His truck has been here for weeks, and he's on private HOA property right now." I smiled, stood up, and extended a hand to the deputy. "Officer Sutton, my name is Alex Miller. I own this property. Would you mind stepping inside for a moment? I think I can clear this all up." The deputy nodded, and I led him into my small living room, leaving Brenda to fume in the driveway. I didn't bother with my big, dramatic laminated maps. This was a surgical strike, not a shock and awe campaign. I simply opened my laptop, brought up the county's official Geographic Information System, GIS, website, and typed in my address. A map populated the screen, showing my parcel in clear detail. "Sir, as you can see from the county's own official database," I said, pointing to the screen, "my property line extends a full 50 feet on that side of my cabin. My truck is parked well within my own land." I then clicked another tab, bringing up the scanned image of my recorded deed. "And this is my deed, which makes no mention of any HOA covenants. The complaint you've received is from an association that has no jurisdiction here." Deputy Sutton was no nonsense. He leaned in, studied the screen for a moment, then nodded. He had seen this sort of neighborhood squabble 100 times. "Looks straightforward to me," he said. We walked back outside. Brenda was now standing, hands on her hips, expecting to see me in handcuffs. Deputy Sutton addressed her directly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and official, "I've reviewed the county's official property records. This gentleman's vehicle is parked on his own private property. Furthermore, this entire parcel is not part of the Crestview Estates HOA jurisdiction. There is no criminal violation here. It's a civil matter, and from where I'm standing, he's well within his rights." The color drained from Brenda's face. Her smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed gape. But our covenants," she stammered. "Our rules supersede. That's just a website." "Ma'am," the deputy said with a hint of weary patience, "the property lines recorded by the county are the law. There's nothing more I can do here." He tipped his hat to me. "Have a good day, Mr. Miller." And with that, he got back in his cruiser and drove away. Brenda was left standing in my driveway, sputtering, completely and utterly humiliated in front of the authority figure she had summoned. She shot me a look of pure, undiluted hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed, before climbing into her golf cart and speeding away. "Oh, I know," I said quietly to the empty driveway. "We're just getting to the best part." The failed public shaming had only hardened her resolve. She was now more determined than ever to destroy me at the annual meeting. She had no idea I was counting on it. The evening of the Crestview Estates annual homeowners meeting arrived, cloaked in the cool mountain air. The community clubhouse was buzzing, not with excitement, but with the dreary obligation that characterizes most HOA meetings. Fluorescent lights hummed over a drab room filled with about 40 or 50 homeowners seated in folding chairs. A table at the front held a water pitcher, some styrofoam cups, and Brenda, flanked by 2 other board members who looked profoundly bored. She was the picture of authority, shuffling papers and calling the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. I slipped into a chair in the back row, my large black portfolio case resting against my leg. It felt like a dormant weapon. Across the room, I caught George's eye. He gave me a short, nervous nod. I offered a calm, reassuring smile in return. The first hour was a masterclass in bureaucratic tedium. Brenda droned on about the budget for seasonal planting, a debate over the approved color palette for front doors, and a lengthy discussion about dog waste. Through it all, she kept dropping hints, building a narrative for the main event. "We must be vigilant in enforcing our covenants, which brings me to a very serious issue we will address later," she'd say. Or, "Our property values are only protected if we present a united front against violations." She was painting me as a villain, a threat to their suburban tranquility and their financial investments. I let her. Every word she spoke was another foot of rope she was feeding me. Finally, the moment came. Brenda took a deliberate sip of water, cleared her throat, and looked out over the crowd with a grave expression. "And now," she announced, her voice resonating with manufactured solemnity, "we must address the final item on our agenda. The ongoing and serious enforcement action against the property at 12 Mountain Spur Road." A hush fell over the room. All heads turned to look at me in the back. I could feel their gazes, some curious, some hostile, some just plain nosy. "Mr. Alex Miller, would you please stand?" she commanded. I rose slowly, my expression neutral. "Mr. Miller," she began, her tone a mix of a stern headmistress and a prosecuting attorney, "you have been issued multiple violation notices for a commercial vehicle, unapproved structures, and general disregard for our community's governing documents. These fines now total over $500. The board has already voted, pending this final appeal, to place a legal lien on your property if these fines are not paid in full within 10 days. Do you have anything to say for yourself before we conclude this matter? The silence in the room was absolute. Every homeowner was leaning forward, waiting for the drama. They expected me to argue, to plead, to get angry. They expected a fight on her terms. They had no idea I was about to change the terms of engagement entirely. I let the silence hang for a beat longer, then gave a slight, confident nod. "Yes, I do, Brenda. Thank you for the opportunity to speak," I said, my voice calm and clear, easily carrying through the quiet room. However, my response is a bit more involved than a simple statement. With your permission, I'd like to use the easel up front for a brief visual presentation to clarify my position for everyone here. Her face registered a flicker of confusion. This was not in her script. But denying me the chance to speak would look weak. "Very well," she said curtly. "Be brief." As I walked to the front of the room, clutching my portfolio, I could feel the atmosphere shift from simple drama to genuine intrigue. The show was about to begin. I reached the front of the room and placed my portfolio on the floor. I looked out at the faces of the Crestview Estates homeowners. They were expectant, ready for a showdown. Brenda sat back in her chair, a smug look returning to her face, confident that whatever I was about to do was a final, desperate act. I unzipped the black case and pulled out my first visual aid. It was the massive laminated county plat map. I used the pushpins already on the easel to secure it. The room, which had been murmuring, fell silent again as they took in the huge, official-looking document. "For the record," I began, my voice steady and professional, "my name is Alex Miller. By trade, I am a licensed cartographer and land surveyor. My entire job is to read, interpret, and verify maps and legal property descriptions." I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "Brenda, you and the board have fined me for violations of HOA covenants on my property. This," I said, tapping the map with my finger, "is the official recorded plat map for the Crestview Estates subdivision, on file and certified by the county clerk's office. And as you can all clearly see right here, I traced the thick red line I had drawn. My property, Parcel 7A, is explicitly, legally, and permanently excluded from the territory of the Crestview Estates HOA. I pointed to the fine print in the surveyor's notes on the map. It says so right here. This means the HOA has exactly zero legal jurisdiction over my land, my home, the vehicle parked on it, or the wooden owl my niece made for me. Therefore, all fines levied against me are null and void. Furthermore, any attempt by this board to place a lien on my property based on these voided fines would not just be illegal, it would constitute the filing of a fraudulent instrument with the county, which, as I'm sure your legal counsel could tell you, is a felony." A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. People were turning to each other, whispering. George, in the front row, was grinning from ear to ear. Brenda's face had gone from smug to shocked. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. That's a fake," she finally managed to stammer, her voice shaky. "The developer." "Our documents. I assure you, it is a certified copy, and I have the certification receipt right here," I said coolly, patting the binder I had placed on the table. "But honestly, my little property dispute isn't the main reason I wanted to speak to you all tonight." I paused, letting the drama build, then reached down and pulled out my second, more devastating map. "This is the real issue we should be discussing." I pinned the overlay map over the first one. The effect was immediate and visually shocking. The familiar shapes of their main road and community park were now glowing in a bright, accusatory red, clearly disconnected from the legally defined blue area of the HOA's actual property. This map shows the HOA's claimed jurisdiction from your own internal documents, laid over the official county plats. For 15 years, all of you have been paying HOA fees for the maintenance, landscaping, and insurance on these red areas, Mountain View Lane and Crestview Park. Brenda and the board have been enforcing rules and levying fines for violations in these areas. I let my gaze sweep across the room, meeting the eyes of the stunned homeowners. "The problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that according to the official property deeds and transfer records at the county courthouse, the Crestview Estates HOA has never held the legal title to any of this red land. To put it plainly, I said, turning to look directly at Brenda, you don't own it. The word own hung in the air, electric and heavy. For a moment there was complete, uncomprehending silence. Then, the room erupted. It wasn't angry shouting at first, but a cacophony of confused questions fired from all corners. What does that mean? A woman in the front row asked, her voice trembling slightly. Who owns the road? A man in the back called out. Are you saying our fees have been for nothing? Someone else demanded. Brenda was frozen solid, her face a pale, bloodless mask. Her entire world, the meticulously constructed kingdom of rules and regulations where she reigned supreme, had just been publicly declared a fantasy. Her power wasn't just challenged. Its very existence had been disproven with maps and legal records. I held up a hand to calm the room. Please, let me explain the implications, I said, stepping into the role of an educator. What it means is that for over a decade, the HOA has been collecting funds from all of you to maintain property it has no legal right or responsibility to. It means that every fine Brenda or this board has ever issued for someone parking a guest's car on Mountain View Lane, or for having an unapproved gathering in Crestview Park, was likely illegitimate, as you cannot enforce your private covenants on land you do not own. I let that sink in before delivering the final critical blow. And it goes beyond just the money. There's a massive liability issue here. The HOA carries insurance, which you all pay for. But did you know that most general liability policies can be voided if the insured party doesn't have a legal, insurable interest in the property? If, God forbid, a child were to be seriously injured on that playground equipment in the park, the HOA's insurance carrier could refuse to pay the claim. That financial liability could then fall back onto every single homeowner in this association. You have all been exposed to enormous personal risk, all because the board never did its due diligence. The mood in the room shifted instantly from confusion to cold, hard anger. All eyes turned from me to the front table, specifically to Brenda. She was no longer a president, she was a defendant. It was George who lit the fuse. He stood up, his voice shaking with years of pent-up frustration. Brenda, I paid you over $400 in fines over the last 3 years because my son parked his pickup truck on that road when he came to visit for Christmas. You sent me threatening letters. I want my money back. That broke the dam. A chorus of similar grievances erupted. You fined me for the catering truck at my daughter's graduation party. I got a violation for planting tulips around the community mailbox. Our fees have gone up 20% in 5 years. Where did that money go if we don't even own the land? Brenda looked around wildly, as if searching for an escape route. Her authority had evaporated in an instant. The fear and respect she had commanded were gone, replaced by contempt and betrayal. She had built her identity on the enforcement of rules, and I had just proven that her rule was a house of cards, built on land she didn't even own. Her reign was over. The takedown was complete. The immediate aftermath of my presentation was pure, unadulterated chaos. But it was a chaos with a purpose. The homeowners, now armed with a common grievance and a clear target, turned the rest of the meeting into an impromptu tribunal. Questions were no longer directed at me. They were accusations hurled at Brenda and the stunned board members beside her. George, empowered and vindicated, formally made a motion from the floor. I move for a vote of no confidence in the current president, Brenda, and the immediate removal of the entire board for gross negligence. The motion was seconded by a dozen voices at once. A frantic, makeshift vote was taken by a show of hands. It was nearly unanimous. Brenda was stripped of her title right then and there, in the same room where she had intended to publicly humiliate me. She didn't say another word. She simply gathered her papers with trembling hands, her face a mixture of rage and utter defeat, and fled the clubhouse without looking back. The kingdom had fallen. A new temporary board was hastily formed, with a reluctant but determined George at its head. Their first official act was to pass a motion to immediately retain a real estate attorney to begin the arduous process of untangling the mess of the common area, as a process I had effectively started for them. My folder of certified documents, my arsenal of truth, became their foundational evidence, Of course, all of my supposed fines and the threatened lien vanished like a morning mist. In the weeks that followed, the community underwent a radical transformation. The attorney they hired confirmed every one of my findings. The homeowners had two choices: either enter a costly legal process to formally acquire the title to the common lands from the defunct developer's scattered stakeholders, or petition the county to take over the road and park as public property. They chose the latter. The result was that their HOA fees were drastically reduced, as they were no longer paying for maintenance and insurance on land they didn't own. The power of the HOA was rightly diminished, refocused on its actual, legally defined responsibilities. My victory was quiet, but total. I had my peace. No one bothered me about my truck, my owl, or anything else. I was no longer the outcast. I was the liberator, the strange man in the cabin who had brought truth to the mountain. I earned nods of respect and waves from neighbors who had once viewed me with suspicion. I even found a permanent friend in George, with whom I now share a beer on his porch from time to time. Reflecting on it all, I see the profound irony.